And the Ministry of Health has been very key in terms of pushing progressive policies, that aligns with international, with international requirements. And now, so there has also been, documented evidence of widespread violations, and this is across border. Whether it is our homes, religious organizations, health institutions, that has been widespread. And I don't know if you can recall, many of the news, that have come up with regard to several religious institutions, being able to put away, seclude, chain persons with mental health conditions in the guise of faith-based healing. So that has been a challenge, and that also includes the same thing in our homes, and unfortunately also in our, mental health institutions. There has been some gaps with regard to that. So what has caused this status of affairs is that, of course, the stigma that arises as a result of or against people with psychosocial, cognitive and intellectual disabilities, and mostly, lack of acceptance. Naturally, we fear people who are different from us, and of course, the negative stereotypes, which then leads to discrimination. And this is where you unfairly treat a section of a population, or unfairly treat somebody on the basis of who they are or what they are not. And this then has led to social exclusion across board, not just in health, but also in accessing other rights that actually make life, if I may say this, worth living. And this cuts across education, employment, housing, and social services. Maybe I'll pause there and briefly ask, just throw this question to the participants. What are some of the negative stereotypes that you may have either have had or you yourself have? Let's be honest, we are also human beings, against persons with mental illness, either in your practice circles, in the mental health sector, or in our communities, in our families. What are some of those stereotypes that we have? I don't know if there's an option to type in the chat the responses, but we'll be coming back to that. So I was asked to speak about human rights. So I'll very straight away go to, so what is this human rights? We keep hearing. How would you describe human rights? So basically, human rights are entitlements that everyone, by the fact of being a human being, you are entitled to. So they are inherent in you. And what we say in human rights is that the states do not give. Nobody gives you these rights. The only thing they do actually is to formally recognize the existence of these rights. And we also emphasize that they are not privileges to be doled out as, it's charity, and therefore you ought to be grateful that you are receiving them in the first place. No, they are actually rights, and we demand them. And they are universal, apply to all, regardless of status, whether whenever you come from, whatever your religion, race, whether you have a disability or not, whether you're rich or poor, whether you are yellow or white or black, it does not matter. And so we talk of that, that they are universal. They should not be taken away, inalienable. They should not be taken away arbitrarily. And also that they are interdependent. And that means that, for instance, if I don't enjoy my right to education, chances are that I will also not enjoy the right to work or to, have dignified work. Chances are that, if the socioeconomic conditions are not taken care of, then I'm unlikely to participate even in the other civil rights. So they are interrelated, they're interconnected, and therefore when we fight for these rights or when we demand them, we need to seek to address them holistically. And now, in terms of Of course, who can violate is more negative, maybe who can uphold. All of us have an obligation. Of course, the primary responsibility to protect, to promote, and fulfill human rights is primarily on states, the governments of countries. They're the ones with the primary responsibilities to make laws, to build institutions, to make all the other administrative, legal, policy measures that needs to be made in order to ensure that the rights are achieved, and also to protect other people from those who want to violate their rights. So, but also note that as individuals and also as service providers and as service, providers also in health, even as for those who are running kiosks, I don't know if you call them kiosks in health. In law, sometimes we call our startup law firms kiosks. So, I mean, you are an employer there probably. You employ people, you receive clients, you treat patients. And so there is a duty upon us, then to ensure that we are respecting human rights. And therefore, we are on the one hand, we can actually have our rights violated. So we can be victims of violations, but also on the other hand, we are also potential violators of human rights. Now, Dr. mentioned about this higher risk of violations, especially for persons with psychosocial, intellectual, and cognitive disabilities. I will interchangeably be using the term mental illness just for ease of, less mouthful. So vulnerable people, these are at a higher risk, and examples are persons with mental illness. And it is important to recognize that so that then we afford the right protections. And even as we do that, it is important to recognize that there are layers of violations. It is possible to have multiple violations, yeah? So for instance, a woman with mental illness who walks to you, to your office, maybe is coming, I don't know, 100 kilometers away, is probably from a marginalized community, probably is less educated, is more likely to be having their rights more violated. So those are the intersectionalities that also we are sensitive to when we are trying to improve the rights of those who are under our care. I think I'll jump that and just go straight away to the formal recognition of human rights. I call it formal recognition. I mean, if you, the history of human rights is long, goes way back. Yeah, but in terms of the formal recognition of human rights, I would like to start in 1948. And this is after the World War II, remember? And so it was recognized the importance of actually ensuring that there is protection of all human rights, and which then all states, the community of states, would be bound by it. And therefore we had the UDHR, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly on 10th December 1948. So it is the first legal document to set out human rights. And you will remember then that 10th December is why we celebrate International Human Rights Day every year. That is the reason, because that is when this document was formally adopted. It has 30 articles, and it offers protections for everyone and across, whether civil, political rights, economic, and all those other rights, they are protected there. And now, after this document was passed, there emerged several other international conventions that specifically protected various rights. And I will not, they are there on the screen, and because of trying to save on time, I wish not to go through them. But I will come back to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which Daktari introduced, and which is of specific, very special relevance to us and participants as we move forward. But also to mention that regionally, there are all these other conventions at the regional AU level. And so as a country, Kenya, in our context, we've ratified, for instance, all these conventions. as well as regionally, all this. And what that means that then we, as a country, we are supposed to enforce, to put in place mechanisms that will ensure that the obligations that the states have committed to are adhered to. Now, locally, so after states have ratified or accepted, and this thing is voluntary, yeah? Those multilateral conventions at international UN level and the EU levels in our context, then you're supposed to nationally be able to do what it needs to be done in terms of your laws, policies, procedures, in order to ensure that to domesticate, yeah, to domesticate those specific provisions in your domestic law, right? So in our case, you're aware of our Constitution of Kenya, especially Chapter 4 on the Bill of Rights. And I would like to invite us to, pay more attention specifically to those articles, 27, 28, 29, 35, 39, 40, 43, 45, 48, 54. So this is 27 is the famous one on, equality and non-discrimination. We have 28 on the, is it freedom? There is the freedom and security, sorry, it is the human dignity that secures the inherent dignity of everyone. 29, that the freedom, the security of the person, and this is what the article that then says that nobody should be subjected to psychological or physical torture and or denied freedom arbitrarily. And on, including the right to found a family. Article 43 is the one on socioeconomic rights. 48 is on access to justice. 54 is the one specifically on persons with disabilities. 40 is the one on the right to property, and 39 is the one on freedom, residence, and movement. So, and this is relevant, especially if you recall persons with mental health conditions, particularly in our institutions, they do not really enjoy this right. And now other laws in our context include the Health Act, and I'm glad to note the definition of health in that act actually includes mental health, which is very progressive and in line with the international standards. But more specifically, the Mental Health Act, Cap 248, is of great interest to all of us. And because it's now the law that specifically focuses on the mental health. And I will invite us to specifically look at Part 2 of the Act, which lays out the rights of users of mental health services. And these amendments were brought about by Act number 27 of 2022, which then tried to really amend this law to conform with the CRPD standards, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and best practices. Well, there were some very, good milestones in this amendment. If you allow me to just brush one or two in this part. This act recognizes that everyone has the right to the highest attainable standard of mental health services, and that a person with mental illness has the right to appropriate, affordable, accessible physical and mental medical health care, counseling, rehabilitation, and aftercare support. Yeah. So that is really important in terms of the affordability, accessibility, but also appropriateness of the kind of care we are giving to the people who are around us or who walk into our, into our institutions. Now, another very important development is that this act emphasized on the community health and outpatient primary mental health care and treatment. So it was a paradigm shift from what we are used to, which is over institutionalization of persons with mental health conditions. Yeah. So you have mental illness. Well, we lock you up to kupeleke. Let's take you to that place away from us, because that is where you belong and not in our society. It also brought about the issue of free and informed consent, and it requires written consent before you actually administer treatment. And where then that is not able to be obtained, there is provision for supported decision-making. And now the access to medical insurance, this was very important because you remember, due to the stigma, the stereotype, for a long time, even our medical, insurance providers were shunning away, and I think some still do, covering mental health patients. And this has been termed as discriminatory, and whether public or private insurance providers, you can actually be fined. I think the fine is up to 5 million or 3 years imprisonment, something like that. So it's serious, and so it's simply trying to ensure that then everybody has access to the healthcare on an equal basis with others. And it also guarantees the full gamut of economic, social, civil and political rights, access to information confidentiality, and all that. However, now, as progressive as this Mental Health Act is, it has been faulted by human rights advocates to the extent that it falls short on some of the provisions, that especially around seclusion, restraint, substituted decision-making is brought in another door, and emergency involuntary treatment. So there have been undertones around that, and because they directly do not conform with the provisions of the CRPD. Other acts, which I'll not go into detail, but just to mention, is Persons with Disabilities Act, 2003. Now, this act has been undergoing review for the longest time, and hopefully it will soon be out. And the idea is that then this act is supposed to conform with not only our constitution, but also the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. There is the Persons Deprived of Liberty Act and the Prevention of Torture Act. This one I should draw attention to, and especially those of us working in public institutions or who are public officers. It's important to note this, and I highlighted there the definition of what amounts to cruel, inhuman, degrading treatment or punishment in the terms of that act. So these are actually provisions that could interest you and that could be brought, to your attention if violated. And of course, then we have the mental health policies. We even have the suicide prevention strategy, and other very progressive action plans. Other laws are there, like the Children Act 2022, the Basic Education Electoral Laws, and also there has been efforts to bring specific legislation on persons with disabilities. Just to mention that our laws are not the whole, I would say our legal infrastructure generally as a country is not all compliant with the CRPD standards, because then you realize that, for instance, electoral laws, they are discriminatory against persons with disabilities in a way. Marriage Act, they are discriminatory against persons with mental health conditions. If you look specifically, for instance, at some of the instances when you can nullify a marriage, when you can do all these things, you'll discover that then persons with disabilities are disadvantaged. When you can dispose of your property, you already deem persons with disabilities as people without legal capacity at all. And so the default is always like, let somebody else do it for them. So it's basically you substitute, we assume they don't exist. They are not capable of making decisions concerning them. And therefore, we need to have somebody else make for them. I don't know how much time I have left, but I wish to just bring something about the models of disabilities. I think it's important because this ties on with what we began with regard to stigma, the stereotypes, where we are coming from, where the world is shifting to in terms of the care of persons with mental health conditions. So traditionally, the medical and charity or charitable models have been the most common. And what the medical model simply says, or this viewpoint, which for a long time was very dominant, it says that it views disabilities as a purely a medical problem that needs to be solved or cured. And persons with mental disabilities, they are broken. They simply need fixing. Yeah. So I mean, you are the one with psychosis. You are the one with fits. You are the one who needs care. You're the ones who you're the one who can't walk. Therefore, you're the problem. So I mean, let's just look for what is available to fix you, you problematic person, and it should be okay, and everything should be good to go. Yeah. And then the charitable model now is the other side of the, it views persons with disabilities as objects of charity. Yeah, they need to be pitied. They don't have much capabilities. This is what I call woshie, woshie mentality. They are passive recipients of social welfare, must depend fully on others. And I dare say that this is the model that then gets overly excited. Yeah, it's from this viewpoint that sometimes unconsciously we tend to exaggerate the praises, yeah, the commendations we give persons with disabilities when they do the ordinary things in life. So we do documentaries showcasing how amazing they are. And while that comes from a good place, most times it actually does not do good in terms of removing the stigma and this charitable model that, makes persons with disabilities just appear like, the object. We shouldn't expect much. They are subjects of charity. Now, the
recording in progress.
The social and human rights model are the more progressive ones, and they are related. So the persons with disabilities for the social model, they say, no, wait a minute. The persons with disabilities, whatever form, whether it's mental health conditions, whether it is physical, they are not the problem. It is actually the society which is a problem, yeah? So people simply have impairment, and that is okay, because look, we are all different. We are all born different. We have different talents, different capabilities. And so even my sensory and cognitive differences that does not conform to what you call quote, quote, normal is okay. And it's part of the beautiful tapestry of life. So what you need to do and is to change this society, which is disabled, because my impairments are not the problem. It is the society. So it views disability more of a social construct and says, look, just eliminate these attitudinal and environmental barriers, and me, I'm okay, yeah? So just provide this reasonable accommodation, okay? So if it is, give me ramps instead of stairs, I'll be able to walk, I'm okay. You don't need to try how to fix my, inability to walk too much. Focus on how you can remove the barriers to enable me, yeah? If it's the education system, rather than looking at how you should, remove me away from the schools, and how can we adapt slightly the program? Yeah, maybe I just require a bit more time to learn, or when doing exams, I just require an hour or two. So this is the social, and it's related to the human rights, and now the human rights model, and these are the two schools of thought we want to hope that at the end of the QR. The quality rights program, most of us, if not all the participants, will have shipped. Will have shipped. And that is not to totally render the first two totally irrelevant. It's just to say, look, this is where the world is going, and this is the more helpful care and viewpoints that we need to put more emphasis on. So human rights, persons with disabilities have the same rights with others. And that, so we should then focus on eliminating these barriers so that to enable persons with disabilities enjoy their rights on an equal basis with others. And we say that if you fail to actually remove these barriers, if say it is in an environmental setting, yeah, you refuse to provide this accommodation. In fact, it may be that you've removed me from the shortlisting and I have evidence that it is because of my disability. Then actually, you have liability there and should be sued, yeah, for it. So it emphasizes then, so how do we provide reasonable accommodation? And reasonable accommodation is simply the adaptations that you need to make to the environment to enable persons with disabilities participate on an equal basis with others. Because remember, we started by saying they are they enjoy rights on an equal basis with others. Okay, and the idea is so that they enjoy these rights independently. Please allow me to just very brush through this one, but I won't go into detail. And then I'll have 2 more slides I conclude. I hope that's okay. So now the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which I mentioned earlier and I said I would come back to it, was adopted in 2006. And, you know, it was adopted, and this was after a long process of consultations, and after even it was realized that the UDHR, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, was not really, there were still violations. The persons with disabilities continued to face specific violations. And so it was necessary to come up with a specific convention that acknowledges the challenges, the kind of discrimination and the challenges that they continue to face. So it was adopted in this year, and Kenya adopted it way back in 2008 in May. And this convention embraces the social and human rights models that we have spoken to previously. It recognizes that persons with disabilities, they are full and equal members of society with inherent dignity and human rights. And the idea of this convention is simply to make sure that people with disabilities have the same rights as everybody else and that they are respected by others, okay? And then it goes on, there is that definition of disabilities I wish not to go into. So basically, these are the principles that are set out there. When you look at it later, when you have more time, these are the principles. So the emphasis on inherent dignity, the individual autonomy, and the freedom to make one's own choices and independence of persons. And this includes choices concerning, where to live, who you are, whether even one, even with regard to relationship, whether to enter into, into relationships and others. And that reminds me of one of the cases that came to court sometimes back. And the issue was whether, regarding sexual, it was a sexual offense. And then, so the argument and what the prosecution was purporting to do is to simply present arguments that the person in question was a person with disability and therefore did not have the ability to consent. Again, look at the model we spoke to earlier. They are simply they have no say, they can't feel, they can't make a decision as to even their own intimate relationship. And the court very progressively was able to make a ruling in that case. It's called Wilson Siringi case. So there is also the principle of non-discrimination. Do not discriminate anybody on the basis of, and this is the unfair treatment on the basis of their disability. People with disabilities, they need to participate fully and effectively and be included in society. And then, so we need to demolish these stereotypes that people with mental health conditions belong to, it's to take them away. And please let us note that the world now is moving to actually deinstitutionalization, and we have international guidelines on that. I think this year they were celebrating the 2nd anniversary, which basically are encouraging states to move towards investing more in how to make our communities more receptive, more supportive to persons with disabilities, rather than throwing them, over investment in facilities to lock them away altogether. So all these principles are there, and the rights, the specific rights are there. Freedom from exploitation, violence, and abuse, Article 16. Liberty and security of the person. I wish to say something about Article 14 because liberty and security of the person. Actually, the view is that being impaired does not give, actually no one should be put away solely by the fact that they're impaired. That's the standard. That's the standard, internationally, because then we say that persons with disabilities have the same have the same rights, and therefore they should also be able to voluntarily consent when it comes to even admission and all that. Respect for home and family. This one, again, people should be able to have contacts, and those who are even in our facilities, they should be able to contact their families. I think sometimes they are kept incommunicado, and this is also the families are to blame. I think so in some cases we've heard of families who have literally, if I may loosely use this word, dumped, just they don't want to, you're put away, you put the relatives away, cut contact, don't want anything to do with them. And in one or two cases, actually one case we were following last year was, we later realized it also had to do with the right to property. There were issues of inheritance involved in that. And so it was also a way to disinherit and all that. So all this is happening. Work and environment, 27, again, very important. Because also we are employers as healthcare providers, we employ people at home. We employ people in our facilities, these private institutions. We also then need to be sensitive to be able to provide an environment that is not discriminatory, that can provide adaptations, reasonable accommodations to ensure that persons with disabilities can actually be able to, on an equal basis, participate in interviews, go through the whole process that you go, you have your candidates go through in order to employ them and have them be able to perform at the workplace. And I will stop then at the Article 28, adequate standard of living. I think this is important because if we look at the quality of access to food, the sleeping, arrangements that you normally have for persons with disabilities, especially severe mental health conditions, when it comes to, beddings, I think the question is, do they really meet the adequate, are they receiving clean water? Are they dignified, these standards? If it's use of bathroom, is it private or is it in a way that actually takes away the dignity of these persons who are, held in our mental health facilities? Yeah. Are they using buckets? Those are the details, but basically the adequate standard of living, those are some of the issues there. I don't know what was typed, if anyone typed, in the chat, but maybe these are some of the stereotypes. Sorry. Some of the negative stereotypes against persons with mental health conditions. We assume that, first of all, persons with intellectual lack the capacity to learn and make decisions. Yeah. We also assume, they can never find work in the labor market, don't bother. Let's just find them sheltered work, away from the mainstream labor market. That is where let us look for work. Again, that mindset that they are less than, that, they cannot do as much. Yeah. And then there is this one very common to all of us, and I think as practitioners, if we are very honest, and all of us, even in our home setup, we assume, you have a mental health condition, we're extremely dangerous. And remember, I think the picture that comes to mind when you hear a person has a mental illness or mental health condition is, the proverbial mad woman, in quotes, mad woman in the marketplace, so we imagine, I think, somebody walking around half naked, either with papers on the head or all those. We imagine the extreme. And so so then what this affects is the response we give in the first instance. So in most cases, it's exaggerated, yeah. And so we go for the extreme measures, to calm them down, to remove them, make them, not be less a danger to public, and to us and to themselves. We are in fact helping them. Let's use the strongest chemical restraints as an automatic response without actually examining if there could be lesser restrictive modes of dealing with this person. And on they go. They have no insight into their condition. They are incompetent. They are not self-sufficient. And then you can see some of these stereotypes actually are, they take certain models that we have discussed previously, the charitable or strictly medical model. And this is what then results, because of those stereotypes, this is what we are doing in our homes. This is what we are sometimes doing in our, in our places, detaining, chaining, the places of, you can see the sleeping and all that. So that is what we are doing because of these stereotypes. Sorry, I'm just finishing now in the next 3 minutes, if you indulge me. So the common violations when it comes to mental health, we have mentioned them, but just wrapping through them. I don't know if this is you would admit this is an accurate reflection from where you're serving from, or where we are coming from, even in our communities, because we are also part of families and communities in the first instance. So the issue of neglect, physical, psychological, sexual, financial abuse. There is the issue of seclusion, violence, torture, degrading treatment. And just to point out this one, not very sweet to say, but it has been emphasized over and over again that coercive and non-consensual psychiatric interventions, including use of restraints, and the restraints could be those chemicals and physical. And seclusion, they have been termed as amounting to torture and ill treatment. Then the issues like forced admission and treatment, coercive measures, discrimination, denial of right to home and family. So you never have contact. Some of the people even never have their IDs or their, identity documents. They never have contact. They don't have contacts, or they're not able to contact their family members. There is the issue of inadequate standard of living. We've mentioned that. But also on a larger scale of issues, which just put separately, is even just the sheer access to healthcare facilities. And our Mental Health Act, luckily it very clearly specifies the role of county governments and national governments in terms of addressing some of these things, including the awareness in the communities. So there is that still challenge. Can I go to the nearest dispensary and actually be able to be properly diagnosed and treated for mental health condition, without even knowing that I'm actually going through it? Because if actually 1 out of 4 outpatient cases, or 25%, actually have mental health conditions, those who walk into our facilities, they have this mental health condition, then it tells me that then even at the first contact point, we need to be sensitive to be able to diagnose and therefore be able to afford the right care to this person, beyond the physical examinations that we routinely do. And also the issues of quality, of course, the issue of inadequate mental health personnel, some of the researches that have been done, and now the challenges that were coming up, the restraints. I mean, some would say openly, like, mnataka tufanye nini? What do you want us to do? We have few. I have this number of people I have to deal with. We have this one who is exhibiting violent, in quotes, this thing. What do you expect me to do? And I know there are all these arguments and push and pull and all that. But again, it is not a justification. I think we just have to see what we can do. Then the issue of low budgets, I think it has been improving now over time, but it has been one of the concerns that previously has rendered mental health in the situation that we are trying to get out of. So as I finish, I am aware there are upcoming sessions that then we'll be able to tackle in more detail the specific elements of what we have mentioned about, for instance, coercion, violence. Okay, what do you mean by legal capacity? How does it work? The depth, the in-depth, the meat of it, they will be coming. And so I then would like to encourage all of us to be able to participate in the upcoming sessions when they are planned, so that you can then continue this deeper conversation on the specific elements that we have introduced in this subject. As I finish, this is one of my favorite human rights quotes from Eleanor Roosevelt, that is the former First Lady of the US. And it states, where after all do universal human rights begin? In small places, close to home, so close and so small that they cannot be seen on any maps of the world. Yet they are the world of the individual person, the neighborhood he lives in, the school or college he attends, the factory, farm, or office where he works. Such are the places where every man, woman, and child seeks equal justice, equal opportunity, equal dignity without discrimination. Unless these rights have meaning there, they have little meaning anywhere. Without concerned citizen, I actually can stop there. For me, I think that speaks volumes. And I think this is a clarion call. And to add on to what Dr. mentioned as the objective, one of the objectives of this, is then hopefully we can have more human rights champions from you who are then able to take this forward. Yeah. And I think sometimes when we hear of human rights, we normally label them, those activists, those busybodies. No, it is our role to be able to do that. We think of Gen Zs in the streets, we think of Maandamano. No, but actually where we are working, at home, at home, in your office, I don't know, in those small circles, that is where human rights really is. Even before we can now talk of, global, that is where the human rights effects is felt. The empowerment can come from. And I urge all of us to be able to be champions in all our work, and especially as we embrace the human rights-based approach to mental health care. I thank you so much. Sorry, I've taken a bit, I think, more time than allocated. Over to you, Dr. Catherine.
Thank you so much for that knowledgeable presentation. We've learned and we've really tried to make things simple for us to understand. And can you allow me to, you will answer some of the questions after our third speaker. Masinje here. That speaker is going to be Masinje here. She's going to take us through her presentation. She's a mental health advocate and she's also a Gen Z. Welcome.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Advocate Petronilla and Dr. Njuguna, for your presentations. So I'd like to start by saying that we all experience mental health challenges at different junctures in our life, and no one is immune to mental health challenges. So as I was thinking about my journey, I was looking for a quote that resonates with my mental health journey, and I came across this quote by Juliet. On to the next slide, please. So the quote says that the bravest thing I ever did was continue my life when I wanted to die. There was a time that my struggles are overwhelming me, but choosing to continue with life was the most courageous decision I made. It was a reminder that we all face challenges, but choosing to continue with life is what matters. So my journey started in early childhood. As a child, I was always curious about the special school that was in our neighborhood, and I used to wonder what's special about these kids who are taken to special schools as the rest of us go to these other schools. And I kept asking my mom, who are these special children? So I was so curious about these children, and I found myself drawn to them. And this curiosity grew into a deep love for children. And I realized earlier on that everyone deserves to be loved, respected, and to be understood. On to the next slide, please. So that's how I grew my passion for advocacy in mental health. Okay, next slide. My life took a detour when I began to struggle with my mental health. And I sought help from different psychiatrists and psychologists, but I often felt like I wasn't being seen or heard. And I went through a difficult journey, changing from professionals until I finally found someone who understood me. Some of my rights were violated, and one of them was like, when you're admitted and the nurse just comes and tells you that you have